Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4 for 4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, joined today by a very good friend in life and a man who continues grinding behind the scenes through the second week of preseason. It's none other than John Paulsen. Paulsen, how's it going, buddy?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm really excited about our guests. So why don't you go ahead and bring him on, John?
You usually take this part from me, but I will gladly introduce another friend in life, someone who also seems to make every FSGA, FSWA, Expo trip along with me. It's none other than Yahoo's own Andy Behrens, who I also discovered, we don't have to say the town, but only lives a few essentially minutes, blocks from me. So we need to get together at that pub actually on the corner that has the name of your town in front of it too sometime.
We do. It's funny, like we live in the same town, but I see you all the time. I've been seeing you like every weekend, like wherever we go or wherever I go, you just show up. You're at the Expo, you're at Flex Leagues. We're drafting tonight together. So everything I say today is going to be misdirection. I don't mean any of it. This is just all spin so that Daigle doesn't know who I'm actually on.
That's why it's interesting, because today's episode, of course, we will eventually, after training camp news, get into our guys. And now we have an opportunity, literally live tonight, to poach our guys from one another. Sorry you will be missing out on that, Paulsen, but nonetheless, we will get your favorite players to draft this year as well. First off, though, I would like to start with some training camp news at the top, and that is none other than Christian Kirk, who we finally saw his debut with the Jaguars in the team's second preseason game. And what we received on Trevor Lawrence's 39 snaps was 32 first-string snaps, the most among all of Jaguars wide receivers for Christian Kirk, including 16 from the slot and 8 total targets. Paulsen, actually, let's go ahead and go to Behrens, the guest of honor here. Let's start with you. Maybe this is what you expected in Kirk's usage anyhow, but did you bump him up? Did you move him in your rankings based on now that we have visual evidence on his usage?
No, I was pretty bullish on Christian Kirk. In fact, one of the guys that I'd been toying with discussing today was actually Trevor Lawrence. I like the Jags offense generally. I mean, making the leap from the single worst coaching situation, I don't know, that I can recall since I've been covering the NFL, to a group of actual adults coaching him, I think is going to be incredible for Lawrence. I'm still a huge believer in the talent. We all had jokes when the Jaguars obviously spent $1 trillion on like Zay Jones and Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram and whoever else. But this is a better receiving room. Like, this is a better group of receivers than they had last year. They were throwing, there's a couple hundred targets that went to some combination of like Laquan Treadwell and Tavon Austin and Laviska Shenault, and like it's gonna be better. This is about what I expected for Christian Kirk. I love everything that I've seen and so far read and heard about this offense. So I'm pretty bullish on him, and I'm real bullish on Lawrence.
Any additions to the rankings change log over the weekend, Paulsen, which people can still gain access to on the site by using not your code, screw your code, my code, Daigle10 for 10% off before we hit the 2 most important fantasy draft weekends of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think Kirk has moved up a little bit in my rankings. It's just nice. We were expecting this sort of usage given the contract that he got. And when a receiver changes teams, I'm usually not crazy about it unless there's a role upgrade or a quarterback upgrade. And there's not really a quarterback upgrade here from Kyler Murray to Trevor Lawrence. Although if Lawrence takes a big step forward, it might be a wash, quarterback wise. But it does look like a role upgrade. And he was, wide receiver 27 last year, 26 and a half PPR. He's going off the board, wide receiver 40. Now he's the de facto wide receiver 1 in Jacksonville. So I think there's a little bit of value there. He's one of those guys in the 7th, 8th round comes around and you just kind of the receiver ranks are drying up a little bit. He's a good target because he's a real world wide receiver 1, pretty talented, and he's with an up and coming quarterback.
I would also note that Zay Jones finished second on the team with Trevor Lawrence in that first string usage with 30 snaps behind Christian Kirk. But also, although that's fine for 20-round leagues, we have a lot of listeners who play in deeper leagues. I just wonder how much value he actually offers for your typical recreational 14 to 16 round leagues and redraft, considering hasn't recorded over 70 receiving yards and 48 of his last 49 appearances. I'm not too worried about his usage as the team's second overall receiver.
I would just mention that Marvin Jones is basically free, and he was wide receiver 34 last year. He's still going to, I think, play in 2 wide receiver sets with Kirk. And you can get him, I don't know if his ADP is like wide receiver 140 or something ridiculous. He's available for free at the end of the draft if you want to draft him.
Any other sneaky wide receiver, Behrens, that you're trying to jam into rankings here at the end, whether it be Zay or Marvin Jones? Or Evan Ingram, honestly, if you want to go that route.
Okay, so that's the route I was going to go, because speaking of free players, and like I'm sure we've all been scarred by Evan Ingram. I'm sure everybody has, whether it was last year, whether it was prior seasons, we've all been scarred by Evan Ingram. It's also not that unusual for a tight end to really pop later in his career. That happens all the time. Pretty common for a tight end to pop with his second team, second contract, and all that. Evan Ingram hits my timeline pretty much every day. It's not always for good reasons, right? Sometimes it's one of the Jacksonville beat writers talking about how great Trevor Lawrence looked, and then there were a couple of Evan Ingram drops. That happens. But he's looking for him constantly. They ran that really fun, I think it was the Cleveland game in the preseason, that little bootleg thing on 4th down that went to Ingram and he plunged into the end zone. There are highlight catches here too. I mean, Evan Ingram, his whole career, has been a guy who will blow the easy play and make the occasional spectacular play. It sounds like whatever else you think about Ingram, he's thrown himself into Jaguars camp. He's getting a lot of like first guy in, last guy out hype, which I'm not going to complain about that. It's arguably better than best shape of his life hype. So I've actually Ingram is one of those tight ends where if I don't get one of the top 2 guys off the board, and I don't get one of my pet guys in the middle, then I'm happy to wait for Evan Ingram, because listen, if Evan Ingram doesn't hit for you, you're going to be able to find a comparable player. And as John said about Jones, he's just absolutely free in drafts.
It does lend confidence too that Ingram leads all tight ends in the preseason in first string snaps. You lose me. People typically lose me whenever they cite Doug Peterson's tight end finishing top 10 in scoring and 5 of his last 7 seasons since 2014 as a head coach, because obviously you too would scheme your tight end targets if you had Travis Kelce, Zach Ertz, and Dallas Goedert in their primes. So I don't think that's going to be Evan Ingram, but the fact he is getting that preseason usage with Lawrence, that's why I'm higher on him, because I still in that range want tight ends who are just going to be out there running routes and on the field constantly. Paulsen, we already talked about Dameon Pierce in depth last week, but a more important note even than his 5 carries, 9.5 yards per carry from his first preseason game, is that Lovie Smith then in week 2 of the preseason just didn't play Dameon Pierce at all. Just sat him with the rest of the starters, showing us that they saw what they needed to see. I do think he'll get some usage here on Thursday night, pending when you're listening, in the team's final preseason game, since they are supposed to deploy all of their starters for a little bit, Brandon Cooks included. But overall, the team is trying to tell us that they are very comfortable where Pierce sits now. The question is, where are you comfortable drafting him in home leagues, knowing that his ADP is on the rise?
Well, he's my highest ranked Houston running back, but that's not saying a whole lot.
Relative. Yeah.
I think it looks like he's going to be the guy on first and second downs. If they're competitive in games, he might see 15 carries and a catch or something like that. If it's a good week, maybe a touchdown. But this is not a prolific rushing offense. It hasn't been for the last several years. And, Rex Burkhead is still there as the receiving back. So, a 3-down role for Pierce is kind of unlikely. So he's somebody you could grab, or I wouldn't feel uncomfortable grabbing him as my RB4 or something like that and hope that he hits, or this offense is maybe better than what we think it's going to be from a rushing standpoint. But it's just hard to get behind too many players, on the Texans. I like Brandon Cooks a lot. And that's just about it as far as who I'm trying to target in drafts.
Behrens, are you adjusting Dameon Pierce? And that obviously includes if you were behind him on him from the beginning. I don't know.
Yeah, I had Dameon Pierce kind of sitting in that like Tyler Algier range where I'm just, those are the two spots, Atlanta and Houston, right? Where if a rookie running back landed there, we were going to be really interested because they could just take it over. And he's clearly broken away. So I've got him like in the mid 30s among the RBs now, and I've drafted him there. I'm in a guillotine league right now where I think I just took him like in the 6th round, something like that. He's conveniently buried in almost every platform's ranks, which is great because it means that like a quarter of your league is just going to ignore him, forget about him, and you can just drag him up out of nowhere. So I've been pretty proactive on him. Again, I've got him in a range where he's as John says, I guess I think of him more as an RB3 than I would think of him as a 4th running back. Like I don't, he's still been going a little bit after that sort of dead zone that is just an absolute minefield for running backs. We don't necessarily want to take guys there. He's creeping up into that. But if I'm going to take any running back in that area, give me an ascending young player versus somebody who's losing his grip on a job.
Before we move on, a reminder, you can get $100 matched up to your deposit on Underdog. Not to mention a free 4for4 pro sub by using the promo code 4for4. But for all the details for that, you can head to 4for4.com/underdog. And that's important because what we've seen on Underdog in the past week is that Isaiah Spiller has seen his ADP there plummet from 126 overall to 146 overall, nearly 2 full rounds. And that's important because Coach Brandon Staley said there's a chance Isaiah Spiller will miss the team's regular season opener against the Raiders after he suffered a quote-unquote minor ankle injury during the team's second preseason game. I also think it's important to note, Behrens, that running back Josh Kelly, for better or worse, was already reportedly firmly in the lead to back up Austin Eckler out the gates. And so in your mind, does this do anything for Austin Eckler's stock more so than it does the darts we continue to throw to stash in deeper leagues behind Eckler?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I didn't really think of Spiller, and that's just a guy that I didn't necessarily love coming into the league. So I didn't think of him as some serious threat to Austin Eckler. So I mean, I've had Eckler in my top 4 basically since the process started, since my first stab at rank in the field for 2022. So doesn't do a lot for me because I've just got him so close to the top of the ranks as is. The buzz about Kelly has really been pretty consistent, and it's gone on for a month now. So he seems to have pretty clearly separated. And I think that happened without respect to any health consideration for Spiller. Spiller's one of those guys where if you drafted him early and your intention was to stash him, he's just such a strong candidate to be like your first cut of the year. Like all those guys who end up buried on depth charts who are rookies with maybe some talent, maybe they fall into the right situation. Even if they pop in the second half of the season, it's going to be on somebody else's roster after you drop them because there's going to be 3 running backs and 5 receivers that you're excited about after week 1, and you're going to cut loose all those Spiller types who don't get any run in the opening week.
I know you were already high on Eckler, Paulsen, but any adjustments here, including adjustments for Spiller, pending where you had him ranked previously?
Yeah, I don't know if this really affects Eckler a whole lot. His role is his role. He's passing down back plus a lot of carries. He's got the red zone role. Unless somebody came in and just completely tore it up and looked like they wanted to make a case for the first second down role. And I think some fantasy folks thought that Spiller was going to be that guy. I had Spiller as my highest backup for the Chargers, but not particularly high. I wasn't getting him in any of my early drafts really. And then, Kelly has just been bad this first 2 seasons. I mean, 3.2, 3.3 yards per carry. So it's a little surprising that in his 3rd year, it's coming together for him. But I do think the important question here is not really, which one of these guys is going to give us points on a weekly basis, because I don't think any of them are really that trustworthy. They've kind of run a committee behind Eckler, just even in a rotation with the 2nd and 3rd guy. I think the question is, if Eckler goes down, who can we count on? I don't think we can count on any of them. It'll probably be a committee until there's some sort of hot hand. And we really don't know who even leads the committee. Probably Kelly at this point, but it's really sort of up in the air. And, we see rookie running backs come on in the second half of the season quite often. And it could be Spiller. He might have his chance to do that. But then there's Larry Roundtree as well, who's looked good at times. So to me, it's not a situation that I'm really even targeting in an injury upside type pick at the end of my draft. It's just a situation I'm basically avoiding. I'm taking Eckler in the first round and kind of forgetting about the Chargers running backs after that.
Initially, I was higher on Spiller, and not as a player, explosive player in the NFL, since he did, remember, show up to the combine, ran a 4.64 40, and basically just fell down for a 20th percentile broad jump. Anyone could have done that. But at 6'0", 217, did handle 613 touches in the SEC at Texas A&M. So I figured he'd get favoritism as that kind of Najee Harris archetype in the event Austin Eckler went down, or just genuinely, as he's mentioned, didn't want to handle 200-plus touches again, and then ceding the goal line role to Spiller. But now what we're seeing is that likely is Kelly, and I, too, have been treating the situation like Andy, you have, and that I do want to draft Kelly in deeper leagues, at least in the last round, knowing that I probably won't start him, but drafting him in the last round, knowing I'm likely going to cut him after week 1, at least gives us that peek at him in week 1, because Austin Eckler could get injured, and then suddenly we can avoid having to splurge all our fab ahead of week 2 on Kelly, especially if Spiller's still out. So that's the only reason I'm drafting him. I'm not moving him up ranks personally, though. And next up, we have another dipping player, even more so than Isaiah Spiller. And that's because we've reached DEFCON 1 with Alberto. After he played in the first half with a second-string offense in Denver's first preseason game, he then went on to play into the fourth freaking quarter of preseason week 2. Coach Nathaniel Hackett was asked about it following the game, and he said, "Our tight ends are playing really well. The 5 guys we have playing, so we want to get a good look at all of them. There are guys who played a little more football than others. Albert is a guy who, quote, needs the reps." So here we are now, Paulsen, one of our personally favorite late-round options, knowing his profile, knowing the red zone threat as a big-body player he offers with Russell Wilson, who's finished top 2 in end zone targets in every year since 2018. But the coaching staff is genuinely trying to tell us maybe Alberto isn't ready for this full-time role anyways. How are you handling this news?
This is so disappointing.
I agree.
Breakout stamp. Like, this is
hurts.
just makes way too much sense. I mean, Alberto is 6'6", 258 pounds, runs a 4.49, has a 100 percentile speed score at Player Profiler. I mean, his best comparable is Vance McDonald. I mean, come on, like, what more do we want out of our breakout tight end? This is just, and he was a really high in his yards per route run last year. I mean, everything was pointing towards a breakout with Russell Wilson coming in, and for some reason or another, he just continues to slide down, or the depth chart's so murky, and it's not like the rookie Dulcich is tearing it up. I think he's been out of camp, and Cecil Lammey, I think, said that he's just not ready for prime time yet anyway. So you're looking at, I think, Andrew Beck and Eric Tomlinson and these guys. It's just like, what? They just don't care about our fantasy teams or our fantasy drafts whatsoever if they're not gonna play Alberto, like, to run that seam route and kill those linebackers on that. So he's been sliding down my breakout rankings a little bit, and he's somebody I'll take a little bit later if he slides past ADP. But I have a lot of Alberto so far this year, so I'm trying to diversify my tight end portfolio, I guess if you will, to get off of him a little bit, because it's just not looking good. But he's a guy, like, he's so athletic. He has shown the receiving profile that we love, that if they are at all lenient on his blocking, he could really turn into a top 12 type fantasy tight end. It's just disappointing. I just don't know what else to say.
I don't know if you were high on Alberto this entire offseason, Andy. Now's your chance, actually, to just lie to us and say you weren't. But how are you handling this news for redraft leagues?
No, I can't lie to you, because John, I think I have Alberto in like 2 or 3 of those RT Sports leagues that we've already drafted for magazines. Right, like any magazine mock I did, I think I was the guy who took Alberto. So now I look like an idiot. I mean, there's no good way to spin playing in the fourth quarter of a preseason game if you're in that situation. I can't put a positive spin on that. I can't just say, oh, we got to get him more reps, and yeah, it makes total sense. It's bad if he's playing that deep into preseason action. It's just really bad. I like all the points John made make total sense. It's the athletic profile we like, it's the quarterback we like, it's like everything was setting up for big season. This is just kind of a civic embarrassment for Denver. It is a fantasy tragedy for me personally. It's, I like, these are all, all the leagues that I've had in which I've drafted Alberto are like industry things, magazine things. It's fine. It's not like I'm going to get personally burned by this in any league that that is highly incentivized or anything like that. But I was just looking forward to the season. I'd also built up a case in my head that maybe the Tim Patrick situation can be in some way good for Alberto, and that is clearly not happening. But I guess this just funnels more work to the two guys that we knew were going to get it anyway, right? Maybe this is just the Judy and Sutton show, and it's Javonte and Melvin.
What hurts me is that I was treating him as one of basically only 2 late round tight ends ahead of ADP that I truly thought could break out, him and David Njoku. And I've explained in the past why I'm still high on Njoku, 26-year-old elite athlete in a scheme, even without Deshaun Watson, and quarterback with Jacoby Brissett, who have historically hammered their tight ends in the last 2 years, specifically under Kevin Stefanski. So I'm still high on him. But Alberto, yes, I was jumping up the board. ADP was never seeming to rise on him ever, based on what I thought his range could be as a low-end breakout tight end 1. And so that's why it hurts. So he does fall in line. I still am taking Greg Dulcich in 20-round leagues, but the worst part about all this is that, yes, that Alberto is now getting moved down the board without Dulcich even in the lineup these past 2 games. That hurts.
I mean, I think the one thing that we can take solace in is I'm not totally writing him off because there just isn't anybody there that is tearing it up or that he's lost his job to. We just don't know what's going on, and we're all left scratching our heads wondering why he's playing in the fourth quarter of preseason games. I mean, he could still very well start week 1 and have a breakout game, and then all of a sudden they don't care as much about his run blocking.
A tight end who has basically been treated and garnered interest as the opposite of Alberto is none other than Isaiah Likely. And we don't have to spend too much time here. Likely has, of course, caught all 12 of his targets through the first 2 weeks of the preseason and has been, honestly, just like fun to watch. Such an athletic specimen. He's been targeted on 66% of those routes and ranked second among every player in the preseason in yards after the catch. Is this something that stands out, Andy, to you, knowing that he could emerge maybe as Baltimore's number 2 receiving option, most likely their 3rd?
Yeah, I'm too big a fan of Rashad Bateman to make that case that he could actually emerge as like their number 2 receiving option. But I also think it's more than him just being like the random, I don't know, who's a name from the past, like Ramses Barden or Chaz Schillens or somebody like that, who like just blows up in the preseason, catches everything, total athletic specimen, and then we don't really hear from them as soon as the regular season starts. I think he's more than that, but unfortunately, I think it's more of a 3rd, 4th receiving option in an offense that really just wants to run the ball 35 times.
And Paulsen, that has me asking, what kind of relevance would Baltimore's 3rd receiving option like actually offer? And it's probably not much outside of 20-round tight end premium leagues. But at the same time, yes, given that even Andy only mentioned Rashad Bateman, like this situation is completely ambiguous at the wide receiver 2 role, thus maybe likely means more 12 personnel, and they're jamming 2 tight ends out there more often, especially to run block in that formation, as opposed to trying even to run 3 wide receivers ever out there.
Yeah, I think Andy made good points, and the question I think with this Baltimore offense is how run heavy can they actually be? I mean, we know that they want to. That's the indication, is that they want to run the ball like it's 2019. But will they be able to is another question. J.K. Dobbins is coming back off the ACL. The offensive line, I think they did some work on it this year, but it's just not as good as it was a few years ago. So, I wonder if they'll be able to run it as much as they want to run it. Gus Edwards is going to miss the first 4 weeks. So you've got Mike Davis, Tyler Beatty, and I think Justice Hill is still there. So it's not like this prolific backfield like we've seen in recent years, especially with Dobbins coming off the ACL. So I say all that to say this: they may have to throw the ball more than they want, which makes me a little more. I'm very bullish on Mark Andrews. I think his role is extremely secure. I think Rashad Bateman's a great talent, and I'm starting to look at him more in the 5th round now, because I do think that Baltimore might have to throw the ball more than they want to. And then, last round of drafts, I've been taking some James Prochet when he was lighting up camp. I'm we'll think about Devin Duvernay when he's catching a couple of bombs from Lamar Jackson in camp. But very likely, we might see Likely in there as the number maybe 3 option after Bateman. Maybe you see Duvernay out there with Bateman and then the 2 tight ends and a running back, and that's their kind of their normal formation, especially with Likely lighting it up in the preseason. I don't think that you're going to be looking at him as a starting fantasy tight end unless there's some sort of injury or issue with Mark Andrews. I just don't think that there's enough targets in this offense to support more than Bateman and Andrews as fantasy starters.
I completely agree with you. Having said that, if I keep burning money on Jonnu Smith in the 20th round of tight end premium leagues, then why the hell not with Isaiah Likely? I've made worse picks in my life. And finally, before we get to my guys, I actually want to ask a quick question, Andy. Let's start with you, a little impromptu, because we're all still trying to figure out the fallout here for the Cowboys offense without Tyron Smith. Of course, since Tyron Smith was drafted, Cowboys sack rate has plummeted nearly double inside the red zone in particular. So are there any adjustments you think you're still making behind the scenes, whether it be for Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Tolbert, Zeke, Tony Pollard, etc., with this offense before we hit the regular season?
Dak has been, it's interesting that you asked this. Dak has been one of those guys that has slid down my board a little bit for no good reason. I don't have, incredible justification for it. That the news on Gallup hasn't been terrible, right? I'd been super bearish on all the late season injury guys, by the way, like James Robinson and Gallup and Godwin, all those guys. And they all sound like they're going to be fine. So maybe that was a bit of a mistake, and good job, modern medicine. That's been a success for almost everyone. But he's tumbled down my board a little bit because I don't, it's that second receiver that I don't really trust in this offense. I kind of believe Jerry Jones, by the way, when he's just like, yeah, we're riding Zeke and we're going to see how far this Zeke thing can take us. I haven't landed a lot of Tony Pollard. I'm actually not one of those people who thinks that Tony Pollard is like orders of magnitude better than Zeke. I believe the entire injury storyline with Zeke Elliott last year. I think he's a better player than he showed for much of last season. So I'm not out on him. I'm certainly not out on CeeDee Lamb. I think there's a path for CeeDee Lamb to see like 175, 180 targets this year. That is definitely in play. So it's probably the guy that I'm most interested in. The Dak issue, I suppose, is really just, his first few seasons in the league, you were getting 6 rushing touchdowns, and like that was every year. He was one of their primary goal line rushing options. That is just clearly not the case anymore post injury. I assume that's not going to spike again in 2022. So it's the loss of rushing upside that is done in Dak for me.
I too don't mind drafting Tony Pollard, but to your point, for me, it's in the 9th or 10th round, and the issue is he's never there. Thus, I never get to draft
somebody's always much higher on Pollard than that.
So I never get him out of default by his ADP. Paulsen, any adjustments that you were still considering making before the weekend, given this news?
Yeah, Justin Edwards reached out, and it's nice having an offensive line expert on staff, by the way, who just like gives you a paragraph on an injury like this to Tyron Smith. But he had the Cowboys ranked really high, like 5th, heading into the offensive line, ranked 5th heading into the year. Obviously, this is a downgrade. Tyler Smith is likely to replace him. He's been playing guard. He's got his own injury to deal with, and now he's, Justin's saying that the whole left side is a question mark, and we've gone from a position of strength to kind of a question mark. So he's got him. He's going to re-rank soon. He's thinking 16 to 19 range now, so it's a pretty big, pretty steep drop. And this is one of the reasons I was like pretty bullish about Ezekiel Elliott in the 4th round. I mean, that ADP, we just haven't seen that, Elliott available at that point. I'm with Andy that Elliott was kind of a victim of injury, tried to play through it. They also went super pass heavy second half of the season. So both the touches for Elliott and for Tony Pollard were actually down in the second half of the season last year. And it wasn't because Pollard was out playing Elliott or that the touches went from Elliott to Pollard. It was just they ran the ball less. So, they keep coming out and saying this is about Ezekiel Elliott. He's the centerpiece of the offense. Now we have an offensive line that's sort of a question mark. So I'm a little less likely to say, oh, I'm just going to punt running back until the 4th round and then try to grab Elliott at that point, because it's just a little less trustworthy, because this offensive line was a position of strength. Now it's a question mark. I do think that he at 27 is not dust. I think that I'm going to say it again, the fantasy football community is ageist, and we got to stick by our older players, and we can't just start writing people off at age 27. We start doing that at 30, not at age 27.
That's why I think week 2 is the most interesting part of the Cowboys season. Week 1, they play the Bucs. Remember last year, they also opened the season Thursday Night Football against the Bucs, and they recorded the league's highest pass play rate for neutral game scripts for that entire week. We know how they're going to treat week 1 again against Tampa Bay. Week 2, though, is when it gets really interesting for all these players. And I look forward to seeing that this year against the Bucs in week 1. Let's take a quick break, and then we will be right back with our guys for the fantasy football season. Right now, if you sign up at Underdog as a new subscriber, not only will you receive a free pro subscription to 4for4 with access to all of our off-season content, including our around-the-clock Discord conversations, Underdog will also match your deposit up to $100 by 100%. Literally mirror it. And there are no catches. Just download the Underdog app, use the promo code 4for4 when depositing. That's the number 4, word, the number again, and presto. All right, Andy, this is the trust tree. I tried to get my mentions to the grave last week when I said Najee Harris and T.J. Hawkinson were the fades of fantasy football season, fades of the year, given their ADPs. So I'm going to let you bat lead off here, and you take the blame for your first of favorite players you're drafting for fantasy football this year.
Hawkinson is a good segue here, because I want to talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown, who I have a lot of. And the process I went through when you guys suggested this podcast is I made sure I looked at not only my own portfolio, like who do I actually have a lot of. I looked at the little Fantasy Pros tool to make sure that I was actually higher on these guys than consensus. And I thought it was interesting with St. Brown, because I am well above consensus on St. Brown, and I am well below consensus on both DeAndre Swift and Hawkinson. And that feels right to me. Like, it may actually not be right, but if you're going to be really high on St. Brown, you probably should take it from somewhere. I don't think we assume that the Lions offense, have whatever kind of good vibes you have from Hard Knocks. I don't think we're assuming that they're just going to be some elite offense that makes some massive leap. I don't think you can bottle up and put back on the shelf what St. Brown was doing over the last month and a half last year. Like, that's 6 straight weeks with at least 8 catches. They did, and it wasn't just like high volume slot stuff. They had him in the backfield. Like, they'd run him out wide. Like, he was aligned in fun ways. And that was good to see. And I don't think you can shelve that. And I think that particularly with Swift, like, Swift was a guy where you can look at a significant portion of his season while he was healthy and say, oh man, he was going to catch 85 balls. He was going to catch 90 balls. I don't think that's in play for him anymore. I think a lot of that probably goes to St. Brown, who is a really strong candidate for 90 catches, 100 catches. And you don't have to draft him there because I feel like a lot of people just have a lot of question marks attached. I get it. There's probably more talented players here than Jared Goff can support. I just think there's no way that they go back to making St. Brown any kind of bit player in this offense. So I've got a ton of him.
Putting the magic back on the shelf is the phrase I like, because I keep referencing it as they can't bottle them back up, right? They can't put that magic back at the jar once they saw 5 top 10 performances in that soul-stealing 6-game stretch where he won leagues for us. And remember, until that point, he hadn't played over 80% of their snaps in any game. And then all of a sudden, he develops this magic rapport with Goff, akin to Goff's magic rapport with Cooper Kupp when he was with the Rams, and averaging 1.74 yards per route run from the slot. And the best part is, from that slot, as you mentioned, is that no one else can do it. Like, there's a reason why we're only talking about T.J. Hawkinson, who hasn't shown us any kind of ceiling, and DJ Chark as the players to draft in the receiving game. Neither of those players offer what Amon-Ra St. Brown can do from the slot in particular. There's no one to take him off the field. So, Paulsen, that's why I still think there's a tier drop-off after St. Brown. The issue, or I guess for our fortune, the good news is that no one's treating it like that and jamming him back into like the 5th, 6th round of home leagues when he's proved he has a much higher ceiling than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in home leagues, when your competition's looking at last year's finishes, aren't going to be particularly high on St. Brown. They might remember that he went off at the end of the last season, but they might not. I mean, the chances are equally likely. I checked Fantasy Pros consensus as well. They're at 30. I'm at 24, so I'm high on him as well. I've been targeting him a little bit more. I bumped him up a little bit with this Hard Knocks thing because, I love that he is holding grudges. I'm an all-time grudge holder. Anytime somebody wrongs me, I remember it for 30 years. He can list off every player that went ahead of him and uses that as motivation to get better. And it does look like, very consistently go off when things are breaking down. He's looking for St. Brown. So I do think that's part of what played. I think everybody here will admit it, that part of what played into him seeing 10, 12, 13 targets at the end of last year was the fact that Hawkinson was out of the lineup. And maybe he's not going to see that sort of target ceiling, but he doesn't need to sort of return value where he's going right now, and probably to advance in his second season. I think this is going to be a pretty good offense. We've got a good offensive line, got quite a bit of talent, the receiver. As long as Goff is serviceable to good, then everybody they should score some points. And they're also a team that the defense isn't great, so they might have to throw the ball more than they would really like. So I'm pretty bullish on St. Brown as well.
They have Sharp Football's 5th softest projected schedule as well. I still question if Jared Goff offers the ceiling this team needs to compete, but the NFC is the weakest conference by far, so maybe they can sneak in. I also know that a lot of very smart people are heavy on their over 6.5 season win total. Paulsen, what about your first guy you're drafting in every league?
Well, I'll go with receiver as well, and I know one of your guys. I was going to actually name the same guy, John, but I'm going to pass on him, and I'll talk about him later. But I'll talk about my second guy in the 3rd round that I like, which is DJ Moore. Really one of my favorite guys to draft. I just think he's good. He just hasn't been able to get off of the 4 touchdown total for the last 3 years. And I just think that, and I said it on the Fantasy Mansion podcast, but people laugh at me when I say that he's getting a huge quarterback upgrade this year because he's going from Sam Darnold to Baker Mayfield. Now, what huge doesn't need to be, you're going from a quarterback 3 type to a quarterback 1. It just means that your quarterback plays a lot better. And I think it should be a lot better if you're going from, 14 touchdowns in a season, Sam Darnold and company, to Baker Mayfield, who typically will throw, 23, 25, 28 touchdowns in a season. I think we're looking at maybe an 8 touchdown season for Moore. His typical 1,200 yards might even grow from there. Just a really good player to get there in the 3rd round. I'm always happy to get him.
Baker Mayfield, of course, before he separated his shoulder in week 6, was averaging a 67% completion rate and 8.5 yards per attempt. Just stellar play prior to what he just wasn't able to do after that. What are your thoughts on DJ Moore this year, Andy?
Yeah, it's wild. First of all, that DJ Moore going back to college has just, he had a hilarious quarterback situation at Maryland, right? I think his final year, they were down to like maybe their 4th option, something like. None of them were good. So we've not seen DJ Moore since basically he's been in the public sphere. He's never had a good quarterback situation, and Baker Mayfield might be as good as it's ever been. I had already, I didn't give him a huge bump when Baker was named the starter, only because I'd assumed that Baker was going to be the starter, and it was really weird that they pretended it was a quarterback competition. That seems unnecessary. I love the player, having done what he's done, 1,100 yards a year, again, in just abysmal quarterbacking situations was to me that is sort of, that has like signature significance, right? Like he's going to be great if Baker Mayfield can just stay upright, stay healthy. Baker, by the way, another guy, as you alluded to, John, like guy who paid the price in terms of public perception for playing through injury, right? Like it just wasn't good when he wasn't healthy. It's probably the best option. That like a broken Baker Mayfield may have been the best option they had. That's what they rolled with. It's fine, but I think he's better than obviously what he showed last year.
It's also frustrating that DJ Moore, remember, scored with that poor quarterback play at Maryland, 14 touchdowns across his last 2 seasons. And that's literally how many he has through 4 seasons in the NFL. So his profile was an above average athlete who can score touchdowns. And now he is still that above average athlete, one of only 4 receivers, 2 with a 27% target share last year, 8th among all wideouts with 9.6 targets per game. And yet, even in for 3 consecutive seasons, you mentioned 1,100 receiving yards. Also, he's seen at least 24 red zone targets in these 3 consecutive seasons, yet has not scored more than 4 touchdowns in any of those years. So I think there could be a touchdown avalanche eventually in his career. It's a lot like how George Kittle started his career as a player for some reason, being the best player at tight end who does everything across the field in the NFL, never could score touchdowns, and that avalanche hit last year following his career high in end zone targets. Like, there's going to be a year where DJ Moore hits. And that's kind of what we're waiting on, because we're all debating the same thing. Like, we know he's an amazing player. We know he carries his quarterback every year. We just need competent quarterback play, and competent quarterback play against one of the league's softest schedules for Sam Darnold last year in the first month of the season. That's what allowed DJ Moore to actually open the year with 3 touchdowns and 390 receiving yards. Of course, from week 4 on, he only scored 1 more touchdown. So that's aggravating. But when the avalanche hits, we need to be ahead of it, because that's when DJ Moore is genuinely a top 5, top 6 receiver. So I think that's what we keep debating about Paulsen, is just making sure we try to be ahead of the avalanche at the right ADP.
Yeah, and I just go back to Mayfield's averages. Like, his career averages equate to 4,002 yards, which is 12% over the Carolina passing yardage last year of 3,573. And then his 26.1 touchdowns is an 86.2% jump on the 14 touchdowns last year. So I think this avalanche is coming this year. And he's, Moore's already put up 3 straight seasons of 1,100 yards. This could be a 1,500 yard season with 8 touchdowns.
I am going to break up the party and ruin the fun, per usual, and not mention a wide receiver right now, at least. I'm going to go with a quarterback, and that's because I want to be higher and have Jalen Hurts in every league for a multitude of reasons. We know the Eagles ran the league's highest run play rate with 33 carries per game from week 6 on, and that's the argument against Hurts' upside in the passing game. But remember, our job is to forecast, to prognosticate. And we know that only 21 teams recorded more rushing touchdowns than passing scores over the last decade. 2021 Eagles being one of them. And only 3 of those 21 offenses actually produced similar results the following year. The others, the heavy majority, averaged 6.7 more passing touchdowns the next season. And it's not like Jalen Hurts can't do that if this regression towards passing touchdowns hits. He has 4 performances with 300-plus yards in his first 8 starts, which is as many as Justin Herbert had, and 4 more than even Josh Allen achieved to start his career. And so not only do I want to be ahead of him in this 6th, 7th, 8th round range, depending on where he's viewed in home leagues, but also that breaks up ADP-wise the RB dead zone and the leftover wide receivers that everyone's trying to draft, while you instead target the running backs and wide receivers in the first 6 rounds. If Jalen Hurts, who legitimately has overall QB1 upside, hits in this range where he's going, you not only get Jalen Hurts, the QB1, and a top 3, top 4 player, even potentially as his floor, you get the other wide receivers and running backs that have elite talent being drafted in the first 6 rounds. That's why I love Jalen Hurts so much, Andy.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. It's more about the cost in drafts than it is even about the player, because I don't think I'm not gonna go so far as to say that his profile is exactly Lamar Jackson, right? Like, Lamar has 1,000-yard seasons, which is sick for a quarterback, and I think is probably the most thrilling runner in the league. But Hurts is awfully close. Calls his own number at the goal line plenty of times, which we love. Like, would not be even a little bit of a surprise if Jalen Hurts rushed for 10 scores, 11 scores. That is totally in play. I think he's one of a big group of players, 7 guys, 8 guys, something like that, who have plausible QB1 upside. I don't think we're going to see, you know what else I appreciate is that you didn't make an argument for Hurts that I've heard a few times and that I heard drunkenly from a couple people at the expo, which is that this convoluted thing where, like, okay, Hurts got AJ Brown. This is just like Josh Allen getting Stephon Diggs, and then he blew up, and that's going to, like, that. Josh Allen had traits that Jalen Hurts does not have. And I don't think we should assume that there's that kind of gain in terms of passing ability that's about to happen. It's not that simple. It's great to have AJ Brown. It's really great to take the targets that we're going to go to Jalen Reagor and give those to AJ Brown. That's amazing. So that's a huge win. That alone is a win. I don't know that Jalen Hurts gets a ton better as a passer. I don't think we need it to happen in order for him to be the overall QB1, right? Because again, 800 rushing yards and 10 rushing scores is in play. And if you can do that, then you just need to be like passable as a quarterback.
Paulsen, your thoughts and rankings on Jalen Hurts this year?
I've had him at 6 this whole preseason. And I'm starting to think about maybe moving him ahead of Kyler. And Kyler is what we want Jalen Hurts to become, really, in terms of his passing numbers and his ability to run the ball. He might be in a better situation this year because the offensive line's a lot better than Arizona's. And I think my big struggle with Philly was a tale of two teams last year. They came out of the gates pass heavy. They stunk. They were 2-5, and they just decided, okay, we're just going to run the ball the rest of the year. And Hurts was fine in that scenario, but he was better when they were throwing the ball and being more aggressive downfield. They went 7-3 down the stretch. So I do wonder, like, if they get off to a slow start and they go pass heavy again to start the year, do they kind of regress and do this again? One thing that we talked about the AJ Brown, or Andy talked about the AJ Brown acquisition. That definitely signals what they want to be able to do better, which is throw the ball. It's always great to add like a great, talented receiver. We did see what Diggs did for Josh Allen. You can kind of, if you're drunk at the FF Expo, you can kind of get behind that argument. I wasn't there, so it wasn't me that you were quoting there. But the thing that jumped out to me in preseason, I'm not always big on these preseason stats, snap counts and everything. I think there's some good information out there. I've actually talked with John offline about some of the snap counts and whether or not we should be drawing any inferences from that. But the Eagles on their first drive with Hurts called a pass play on 8 of 8 plays. I think he had 7 pass attempts and a scramble for a touchdown, which got called back or something. But that sort of signals that they're not going to be run heavy, at least, right? They're going to at least be a balanced team that wants to throw the ball. They might end up being really aggressive throwing the ball with all the talent they have. So that made me a little more bullish about the whole offense as a, passing offense as a whole. And I'm starting to think, I think, we've grown up playing fantasy for years and years and years. Ideally, we'd be getting a player like Jalen Hurts, QB 10 to QB 12, and he'd have top 5 upside. But now we got to spend a QB 6, draft pick on him. Because everybody's sharp now on the rushing upside and all that. So that kind of sucks. But at the same time, it is fun to draft him. And I think Andy's, or was it, no, it was John's point where you're looking at him in the 6th round. There's a little bit of a drop off at receiver there. There's certainly not a lot of appealing running backs on the board at that point. I'm looking at my guy in the 7th round. So it is a good spot if you're not sold on somebody like Adam Thielen or Allen Lazard as your wide receiver 3 or 4 in the 6th round. It's a good spot to lock up some upside at quarterback. It's
always funny, Andy. I feel bad because Paulsen will go on those Slack soliloquies to me. And then having been doing this for a long time like him, sometimes I'll just be like buried in my own research. And I'm like, nah, like that doesn't matter. Let's just move on with our rankings like this. But he gives A+ effort in those Slack conversations that should be an article to themselves. Paulsen, I actually want to spin it back to you because you mentioned it transitions to your next My Guy. So I'd love to hear yours.
Yeah. And I think, followers know that I'm very much on Aaron Rodgers as my QB1 in the 10th or 11th or 12th or 13th round, wherever he's going now. I don't know why he's sliding that far. So I'm not going to talk about him, but if you do want to go Jalen Hurts, if you want to combine John's My Guy and then turn around and come back with Chase Edmonds in the 7th round as your RB2 or perhaps your RB3 if you grab 2 running backs early, I really think he has a lot of upside in this Miami offense. Connor Allen wrote a great article about it, which I referred to multiple times, but the crux of it is he's a great passing down back and has a lot of ability in the run zone offense that Mike McDaniel's bringing over from San Francisco. He averaged 5.8 yards per carry, which I think led the league in zone runs, and also the number 1 in EPA per play in zone runs. So really cerebral player too. I've seen some interviews with him talking about his how he analyzes his own game and how he's trying to become better in this run blocking scheme. And I love guys like that who are not only ones that hold grudges, but also ones that really are, continual improvement, not just out there trying to collect a paycheck. Like he's really trying to get good at his craft. And then I saw, 5 touches in the preseason. He had this wicked spin move. He caught 2 passes, just left somebody in the dust. The runs didn't look too great. I think that offensive line is a little bit of a work in progress, but it's going to be better than last year. And I think especially in full PPR, but also half PPR, he's an excellent RB2. And if you can use your 7th round pick on your RB2, that opens up so many options between your anchor RB or your hero RB and waiting until that 7th round. So you can draft a Jalen Hurts, you can draft a stud tight end and still get 3 good receivers in those middle rounds.
Where are you at on him, Andy?
Yeah, I love this call. And he was almost on my short list for guys I might want to discuss in this show. This is a really, really good call. And we're still kind of sort of giving Chase Edmonds to the 0 RB drafters, which is wild because he's going to have a week 1 workload. Like he's going to have an early season workload. And the nice thing is it's not, of course we can worry about whether Chase Edmonds is going to be the guy when they get to the goal line. That's a fair concern. But he's probably going to catch 60 passes. He might catch well over 60 passes. There is definitely a volume receiving role here. He's tied to a quarterback who's going to feed him, I think. I'm on board. If we're talking like 1,200 scrimmage yards, 55, 60 catches, I'm fully on board with that. I think he's a really solid play who goes a little bit later than he ought to.
And let's turn back to you for your second my guy player you're drafting this year.
Yeah, I feel like I need to mention again, I went through this little thing of looking at my own portfolio and then looking at where I am on guys. I'm way ahead of the field on JuJu Smith-Schuster. I'm kind of on JuJu Island here. I've got him at wide receiver 19. I think he's pretty clear. Now, the important caveat here is as we speak, he's still been dealing with knee soreness. If that actually drags on, and again, we bump up against the start of the regular season, I may come down a little bit, but man, JuJu's a good player. And I feel like we have forgotten that over the past couple seasons because he has been, tied to this anchor that is the late stage version of Ben Roethlisberger, right? And the average depth of target for JuJu has been like 4 yards, 5 yards, something like that. He's been at the bottom of the league. And that's not great, but he's a very different player than that. We've already seen in Chiefs camp, JuJu making downfield plays, JuJu in intermediate areas of the field, JuJu basically used everywhere. I think he's really good. One thing I like with receivers that I'm drafting in the first 6, 8 rounds, I want them to have a prior history of success. I like that. He's got it. The last time he played with an actual verifiably good quarterback, like the 2018 version of Ben, it was 111 catches and 1,400 yards. Another thing I like about JuJu is he's weirdly young. He's 25 years old. So the Bears just drafted a guy who's 25 years old, right? He's a year younger than Mahomes. He's basically the same age as Hardman. He's a couple years younger than MVS. This is not an old player. We think of JuJu, he's entering year 6. We think of him as this sort of ancient player who's surely had his best years behind him. He's real young. And as John was saying earlier, we shouldn't worry about this until these guys hit 30. 25 is definitely too young to be thinking that JuJu is somehow past his prime. So assuming he comes through this knee situation, okay. JuJu stepping into a situation where he can get 130 or so Patrick Mahomes targets right away.
And I think what helps Paulsen, JuJu's ADP value, is that not only the McCole Hardman injury, even though I didn't think he was a threat anyhow, but that Sky Moore isn't even being treated like a legitimate player on the first string offense. He's been used more at camp, at least, as a gadget guy with a handful of carries. And then we've seen in their 2 first preseason games with Patrick Mahomes, Moore hasn't touched the field playing behind Justin Watson. So I continue also to be higher on JuJu.
JuJu's, I'm kind of struggling with him. I think I was on just below ADP for most of the year, and then now this knee injury has kind of popped up. I'm having a tough time. He's wide receiver 23 off the board at Underdog, going ahead of Deontay Johnson, Brandon Cooks, Rashad Bateman, Chris Godwin, Amon-Ra St. Brown. I just feel more certain about these players' roles than I do with Smith-Schuster. But Andy brings up good points. I mean, we do have a 1,400 yard season, and even going back to just 2020 when Ben Roethlisberger was less of a shell of himself. I don't know what the phrase is there. But JuJu was fantasy wide receiver 18 with 9 touchdowns, 831 yards, receiving 97 catches. So very low yards per catch. So he's able to do it. He was able to put post fantasy numbers, even, not getting the ball well downfield, which he will get more of that with Patrick Mahomes. So I see the case for him. I'm having a tough time moving him ahead of some of these guys because I do think that this Kansas City offense is going to be a lot of Travis Kelce, and then it's going to be hitting the open guy, similar to what the Packers are probably going to do, where it's more about, where you are in his reads as opposed to scheming things for Tyreek Hill like they used to. There's definitely that upside, though. I don't think Smith-Schuster's washed by any means or anything like that. I just don't know about target share in this offense with, Valdez-Scantling, Sky Moore, Hardman obviously is dinged up. And now we've got Justin Watson, carrying it, starting in 3 receiver sets. So very interesting group. I'm torn on it, but Andy's makes a good pitch, I think.
I'll just say that I really like Sky Moore as a prospect, but I feel like a lot of the buzz in fantasy circles is just sort of wish casting about a guy that we all really like, really talented college player, big hands, all that. We like everything about Sky Moore. There's just nothing indicating that he's going to have a huge early season role.
The argument is the non-Power 5 player drafted in the first 2 rounds. But also that argument literally only has 2 samples in Cortland Sutton and Devontae Adams. I don't want to compare Sky Moore, still a MAC receiver who in 2 games against the Big Ten totaled 63 receiving yards for his career. Like, I don't want to compare Sky Moore to those guys. So no, I've actually been very down on Sky Moore, especially in redraft leagues throughout the entire process. I will go and join the fun again with my own wide receiver. And that's because I want to be on Michael Pittman as a top 10 player. We know that Matt Ryan was already 7th highest in on-target rate last year and finished 9th overall completion percentage from a clean pocket in comparison to Carson Wentz's 32nd and 29th rankings in those categories. And remember, Ryan did that behind an offensive line that allowed the league's highest pressure rate last year and finished dead last in Pro Football's Focus's pass blocking efficiency metric. And so we know with competent quarterback play, Michael Pittman can have a ceiling. That's what we saw when Carson Wentz even proved he was more than just a career 3rd stringer in the first half of last year, with 9.2 yards per target to Pittman and 21 fantasy points per game as the wide receiver 7 through week 9. After that is when Pittman cratered along with Wentz, averaging just 11 fantasy points per game as the wide receiver 30 in his last 8 starts. So with a above average, at least even competent quarterback for the entire year, which is what I expect Matt Ryan to be, Michael Pittman showed he can be a top 10 player. And that's how I'm treating him this year, Paulsen, who also, like you said, is one of your guys.
Yes, I was going to actually pick Pittman. He's a fun guy to pick. He's a fun guy to talk about. Great route runner, did really well in Matt Harmon's reception perception study. And as you mentioned, getting a quarterback upgrade, entering his next season where he's going to really probably grow into we're looking for guys at this range with that. If you're going to pass on a receiver in the 1st round and maybe you're looking at somebody in the 3rd, that's going to make that leap into the top 5, top 8. And I think Pittman is a candidate to do that in this offense with Matt Ryan. I've got him at 8 in half PPR. So I'm definitely on board.
Andy, what about for you, knowing that Pittman does fall in that tier where you do have to confidently select him ahead of A.J. Brown, Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Marquise Brown, the list goes on and on.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Wow, congrats to Marquise Brown for finding his way into that list.
Okay, sorry, I'm higher on Marquise Brown. Maybe that should have been one of my guys too.
Maybe it should have. I've actually got, but other than Marquise Brown, that's a valid list for me because I've
wide
got
receiver 6 through week 9, mind you. Just know that.
I've got Keenan I've got Keenan higher than most. I see, and I admittedly just a few minutes ago I was talking about how anybody who's 30 years old, maybe we should be concerned, and he's obviously 30 years old. He also has like 5 straight years in which I think his worst season is 97 receptions. So I know the floor with Keenan Allen is extraordinarily high. So I've got Keenan a little bit higher, but I think Pittman as a top 10 receiver is more than in play. Great talent. And he's tied to a quarterback who, like, the other thing is, we talk about this with JuJu, and I don't exactly know what the target share is going to be anywhere. That is not a concern with Pittman. There's a very clear number 1 on the Colts, and a total uncertainty about who the number 2 is. I have no idea. It might be Mo Alley Cox for all I know, but I know that the number 1 guy is going to be Michael Pittman. And like, there's talked about CeeDee Lamb having a path to 180 targets. So does Pittman. Told me that Michael Pittman leads the league in targets this year. That's in play. Where else would you go with the ball? I think it's a great call. I think he's a really good player.
And Pittman already finished from Wentz 9th highest target rate or target share in the entire league. And as you said, no competition added around him for Ryan this offseason. Paulsen, let's spin it one more time around the table and get your final guy you're drafting in every league.
I'm glad we're going to do 3. I did want to talk about Isaiah McKenzie. This is kind of a funny story because when I originally ran my projections, I had him as, the Cole Beasley role basically in that offense. And he was coming in way ahead of consensus. And I just got beat down by the consensus drumbeat that Jamison Crowder was going to come in and win the job, and et cetera, et cetera. And as we know, McKenzie came in as the incumbent and has held on to that. Crowder was struggling with an injury to start the camp, and McKenzie's been electric. I think McKenzie actually sat out a little bit and Crowder came in, but all the beat writers say McKenzie's got that job on lockdown. And we do have a little bit of a sample of him getting starter snaps, but in 2 games that he started with Beasley sidelined, he had 6 for 65 and 2 touchdowns on 9 targets in week 17 of 2020. And then he had 11 catches for 125 yards and a touchdown of week 16 last year. So he didn't, he hasn't played starter snaps a lot, but when he's been called upon, he's been excellent. And he's obviously tied to a great quarterback and a great prolific passing offense. He's not going to see any double teams in the slot playing alongside Stephon Diggs and Gabriel Davis, who I also like. But McKenzie's ADP has not risen a whole lot. He's like wide receiver 60 something off the board. And I think he's got a good chance to finish 20 to 30 spots higher than that.
And I would note, Andy, that preseason first game, we saw McKenzie healthy scratched with the starters, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Dawson, Knox, and Gabriel Davis. And then more importantly, the second preseason game, when all of Buffalo starters played, McKenzie played every snap from the slot. Jamison Crowder, again, didn't come on the field until Case Keenum was there. Your thoughts on McKenzie this year?
Yeah, I want to say that when Crowder did come on the field, they bumped McKenzie outside. Like, I just feel like McKenzie's gonna. Yeah, I feel like McKenzie's gonna play. I think he has that Cole Beasley role. I like this call so much that I'm gonna have to pivot to another player when my turn comes up, because I was gonna go with McKenzie. Looking at me versus expert consensus, I am in the overall. I am 82 spots higher on Isaiah McKenzie than expert consensus, and among the wide receiver ranks, I'm like 35 spots higher on McKenzie. I think McKenzie is probably a better version of Cole Beasley, and Cole Beasley a couple years ago was fantastic. If we think that Josh Allen is an MVP candidate, and I think everybody feels that way, there's clearly a path for McKenzie to outperform Gabe Davis here. There's clearly a path for McKenzie to finish with 80, 85 receptions. As John mentioned, the limited glimpses that we've had of him in that slot role have been brilliant. They've been absolutely fantastic. So I think this is a wonderful call. I think that Allen is a player who's capable of throwing 40 touchdown passes this year. And if that happens, it's going to be a hell of a year for like 3 or 4 guys in this offense, McKenzie included.
And I think the ADP hasn't caught up to your rankings simply because people are still giving Jamison Crowder any light when genuinely he shouldn't have that. He should just be off boards completely, unless you're drafting in large field best ball tournaments where everyone makes an excuse for every player, and 20 round leagues knowing you'll probably just cut him after week 1 anyhow. So that's how I treat it.
Yeah, I think Crowder should be what Emmanuel Sanders, Emmanuel Sanders came in last year, and everybody was reporting that he was going to start, and he did, and he got off to a good start, and then kind of faded midseason. They started going to Gabriel Davis, but imagine if Emmanuel Sanders has signed, and we just like, he's going to be the fourth receiver. So you're not out there drafting him in the 12th round or 11th round with that sort of playing time. So I think that's where Crowder belongs right now, given what's happening.
So you mentioned you need to pivot, Behrens. Let's hear who that pivot is.
I'm going to stick with a member of the Bills receiving corps, and I'm just going to mention Dawson Knox because the savvier the league you get in, the more experts are in it, or the more self-appointed experts are in it, the more they run away from Dawson Knox. And the reason they run away, of course, is the likelihood of touchdown regression. Guy caught 49 balls last year, and 9 of them were touchdowns. 71 targets, 9 of them were touchdowns. Obviously, that's ridiculous. It's not the sort of touchdown rate that we necessarily expect. Here's my thing with Dawson Knox. Number one, he's tied to a quarterback that, again, we think can win the MVP and throw like 38 or 40 touchdown passes. Number two, just a thing I like to remind people about, and I tweeted a screenshot of it yesterday. This guy played almost the entire season with a broken hand. He broke it in October, had surgery, missed a couple of weeks, had 17 screws inserted in his hand. He had like a frying pan for a hand. He was literally playing one-handed last year. Mm-hmm. So his usage while playing one-handed, I think there's a decent chance that the version of Dawson Knox that we saw last year when he was like the tight end 6, I think there's a pretty good chance that he's not that bad again for years. I think we could get a much better, I think two-handed Dawson Knox can be better than one-handed Dawson Knox, I guess is where I come down on this. Those are my analytics. I think he's a really good player who has the full trust of a great quarterback. And I don't think we should be running away from him the way we are.
Everyone usually yells about Knox since he did score those career-high 9 touchdowns, all from inside the 20, inside the red zone, by the way, on 26 red zone targets, and treat that as automatic touchdown regression. And maybe that's the case. My issue, though, in that is that you are then not factoring in what you mentioned, his overall usage, because what you should use is the big picture takeaways. It's career highs in snaps, 90%, and route rate, 84% route on Josh Allen's dropbacks for week 2 on, because week 1, he was not a full-time player. He was a part-time player. Week 2 on, they said, we have to get this guy involved. And then more importantly, when he returned from that hand injury, over his last 10 games, he ran around on 90% of Josh Allen's dropbacks. So now you're telling me, even though touchdown regression may or may not happen, we get an every down tied in with Josh Allen. That's all I care about. That's where the conversation stops. If he scores 0 touchdowns, screw it. I'm not chasing the results. I'm chasing you being on the field every down with Josh Allen. That's my only argument, Paulsen.
Well, I mean, I think Andy brings up good points. You bring up good points. Not a player that I've been targeting a lot, but I just look at my projections. He's right there below Dallas Goedert. I usually have an Andrews or a Kelsey on my roster, or maybe a Pitts to start, and then I'm just sort of ignoring the position for a while. But certainly if I miss out on those guys, he's appealing, and he's a better athlete than people give him credit for. 4.64, 40-yard dash, can run down the field a little bit, 87th percentile speed score. And, Andy talking about two-handed Dawson Knox being better than one-handed Dawson Knox. This kind of reminds me of the Jameis Winston argument that LASIK Jameis, who can actually see down the field, was going to be better than non-LASIK Jameis, who's squinting at the scoreboard because he can't really see it sharply. So, people laugh at that, but I actually think that Jameis might surprise some people this year. But yeah, I agree that the two-handed Dawson Knox could be appealing, and you're right about the offense, the overall environment. He is likely the fourth option in the passing game, but I think this passing offense can support that many fantasy starters.
And with that, fantasy football is an easy game. We told you who to draft. Behrens, tell everyone where they can find you.
Yeah, they can find me at Andy Behrens on Twitter. I'm doing something every day at Yahoo Sports, so they can always find me there, and they can check us out Sunday mornings 60 minutes before kickoff when the regular season starts on Fantasy Football Live.
You can find me doing something every day as a selling point I'm going to use for my career from now on. Paulsen, what else do you have coming out this week for everyone?
Well, I just released Paulsen's Players, which is a round-by-round fantasy football draft target and shy away players article. It's basically Draft Day Strategery Part 2. So if you haven't checked that out, go ahead and find that on the site.
And all of my in-depth fantasy team previews are available on the site and updated for the first 2 weeks of preseason. So a good way to catch up if you're just now getting back in the spin of things. We'll be back next week with the final offseason episode before our regular season Monday through Friday pod schedule kicks in. So until then, until that exciting moment, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.